China has vowed retaliation against President Trump's extra tariff threat. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Commerce warning China will take all necessary measures to defend its own interests if the U.S. moves ahead with that additional 10% tariff on the nation. Trump confirmed Thursday that the extra levy on China, along with that 25% tariff on Mexico and the other on Canada, will go into effect on Tuesday. Joining us now to discuss, Marc Busch. He is professor at Georgetown and former trade advisor to the U.S. Department of Commerce. Marc, it's great to have you on. I just want to start on Mexico and Canada, and I wonder how you're reading the tea leaves here. The market would love to see those tariffs come down from 25% come Monday and Tuesday of next week. Do you anticipate that?
I think he's going to invoke the tariffs on Tuesday. He more or less has talked himself into a corner, and for a number of reasons, I fully expect that we will see the tariffs on Canada and Mexico go in, and I seriously doubt that anything can be struck between now and then to give Canada and Mexico another 30-day reprieve or even longer.
Well, that's interesting in the context of what we saw with the UK Prime Minister this week, who did have some success negotiating. And I want to take a listen to some sound here and then get your thoughts on the other side from this conversation.
Mr. President, did our Prime Minister persuade you not to put tariffs on the UK?
He tried. He was working hard, I'll tell you that. I think we could very well end up with a real trade deal where the tariffs wouldn't be necessary. We'll see.
Okay, so Marc, he was willing to potentially say that he's ready to make a deal with the UK. Did the UK have a playbook that Mexico and Canada should be copying here?
No. And the reality is that there are a couple of really interesting terms that the president uttered. First of all, I'd love to know what he means by a trade deal. Sounds like he wants something very narrow, and that is certainly not what the UK has wanted for many years now and was denied under the Biden administration, despite offering the US everything it could possibly have ever wanted. So I seriously doubt there's any lesson for Canada or Mexico, given what we just heard. But for Trump, it's going to be much harder to impose tariffs on the UK than it is given the narrative that he used to invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act against Canada, Mexico, and China. So I think the UK has less to fear, but I seriously doubt that the UK Prime Minister is going to head home thinking that he got something to settle his nerves and he won't have to worry anytime soon about forthcoming tariffs.
Fair enough. It's also interesting in the context of a post from the president on Truth Social this week talking about the severity of his focus on tariffs in the context of what's going on with the tit for tat with China. Do you expect any negotiating to happen with the U.S. and China moving forward on these tariffs, or is it going to be a continuation of this tit for tat?
I think it's great that China reached out to the newly confirmed USTR ambassador, Jameson Greer. That's certainly a sign of some goodwill. But no, I don't expect much negotiation. I expect that China, Canada, and Mexico will begin to firm up their retaliatory lists, despite the fact that, keep in mind, in the executive order, there is an escalation clause that President Trump inserted such that in the event that Canada and Mexico in particular were to retaliate, these numbers will not stay at 25%, and we will have an all-out trade war. And the retaliatory lists are not limited with respect to tariffs. Both Canada and Mexico are getting highly creative and threatening to take this in a very un-Canadian, un-Mexican way going forward. They are potentially going to invoke non-tariff barriers and do it in a very dramatic fashion. So look for this to escalate if, in fact, we see the tariffs go into play on Tuesday, which I expect we will.
And moving forward here, Marc, what investors really want to know is whether the brunt of the impact of these tariffs could potentially be softened by those upcoming potential tax cuts. What do you think of that, in your view, the kind of teeter-tatter between those two catalysts for the market?
It's really an unbelievable question if you think about it. The idea being that somehow he can compensate for the economic damage that he knows he's causing. So it would be great if President Trump were inspired to be a real pro-growth president and give us both no tariffs and tax cuts. The idea that these tariff salvos are going to generate enough income to replace or substantially reduce income taxes is bizarre, and certainly the math doesn't bear that out. But no, I don't expect that we are going to see some compensatory mechanism fully relieve us. And keep in mind, the damage has been done. The damage of these tariffs has already been done. They've seeded tremendous uncertainty. They've created a sense that the United States is no longer a trusted trade partner. And if I'm the UK Prime Minister flying back home, my first thought is it even worth the candle? What is a US trade deal if the obligations can so readily be thrown out the window? So the damage has been done. Investors have two fears. One is the number that the tariff comes in at, and the other is the uncertainty. The uncertainty is now going to be with us for a very long time.
All right, Marc, thank you so much for joining us this Friday morning. Really appreciate you breaking that down for us.
Thanks for having me.